Hello and welcome to Immersive History Chronicles. The hospital in Jerusalem, where the Knights Hospitaller began. On a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean, there are walls that have outlasted an empire. Golden bastions rise straight from the sea, scarred by cannon fire that fell silent 4 centuries ago. Above the doorways of the quiet city behind them, one symbol still appears again and again, an 8-pointed cross, worn by men who began their story not as soldiers, but as caretakers of the dying. They ran hospitals considered among the finest in the medieval world. They commanded a private navy that made sultans hesitate. They struck their own coins and answered in practice to no crown on earth. And yet the order that built all of this began with nothing grander than a bed, a bowl of bread, and a bandage in a hospice for exhausted strangers in a conquered city. How does a hospital become an empire? Before we begin, if you're enjoying these long, quiet journeys into history, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps this channel keep making them. I'd also love to know, where in the world are you joining me from tonight, and what time is it where you are? And now settle in. Let the noise of the day fade away. Our journey tonight takes us back 900 years to a city that had just changed hands in the bloodiest way a city can change hands. In 1099, after a siege soaked in more blood than anyone present ever wished to remember, Jerusalem fell to the First Crusade. The city that emerged filled quickly with thousands of them, arriving on foot from across Europe, exhausted, sick, and with nowhere to go. A small hospice dedicated to St. John had quietly existed there for decades, offering any pilgrim a bed, a meal, and care. A man named Gerard ran it after the conquest, and he asked the newly victorious knights, flush with guilt as much as glory, to fund beds instead of battles. It worked. By the time Gerard died in 1120, his small hospice had grown into an organization with properties stretching into the courts of Europe. It was still, at that point, exactly what it looked like. A hospital. Nothing more. From healers to warriors, when a hospital took up arms. Gerard's successor, Raymond Dupuy, inherited a problem no hospital had faced before. Pilgrims were now arriving wounded, robbed on roads. A fragile crusader kingdom had no soldiers left to guard. So Raymond armed some of his own hospital brothers not to conquer, but simply to escort the sick safely to his door. It was a fusion the medieval world had never seen. A monk bound by sacred vows who was also formally a knight. Within a generation, the Knights Hospitaller held castles and fielded armies, answering to almost no one but the Pope. They had begun as caretakers of the dying. They were becoming something kings had to reckon with. For 2 centuries, the Hospitallers held some of the most formidable castles of the age, defending a crusader kingdom that was, from the start, a small foothold surrounded by a far larger world. It could not last. Jerusalem fell again in 1187. The kingdom shrank until in 1291, its last stronghold, Acre, fell in a siege that killed the order's own Grand Master. The knights who could still walk carried their wounded onto the last ships out, watching 2 centuries of purpose burn behind them. They retreated to Cyprus with nothing but their ships and their name for almost any other order. The end of the story. Rhodes, from exile to sovereignty. Cyprus offered safety, not independence. The Hospitallers were guests there. In 1310, after years of siege warfare, they took the island of Rhodes as their own, and for the first time in 200 years, they were sovereign, ruled by their own elected Grand Master. Rhodes sat directly across the trade routes linking Constantinople, Egypt, and Europe. They fortified its harbor, built a navy crewed by knights once trained to lift the sick, and turned it loose on Mediterranean shipping, officially protecting pilgrims. In practice, a sanctified fleet of privateers, wealthy and feared. The Siege of Rhodes, when an empire came for the knights. A hospital order now ruled an island empire with its own coinage. But an island this valuable, this close to a rising Ottoman Empire, could not be left alone forever. In 1522, Suleiman the Magnificent arrived at Rhodes with a force outnumbering its defenders more than 20-1. After nearly 6 months of siege, the Hospitallers, simply out of men, negotiated a surrender so honorable that even Suleiman admired the composure of their old Grand Master. They sailed away from the island they had ruled for 200 years, landless again. Picture one knight among the exiles, a man who had survived Rhodes as a younger officer, and now, in old age, watched his order accept the only offer it was given. A rocky, drought-prone island south of Sicily, granted in 1530 for a rent of 1 falcon a year. His name was Jean de Valette. He could not have known, studying that unpromising map, that he would one day be its Grand Master, and that this island Malta was where his account with the Ottoman Empire would finally be settled. The Great Siege of Malta, the day the Ottoman Empire was stopped. In 1565, Suleiman sent nearly 200 ships and 40,000 men to finish what he'd started at Rhodes, against roughly 9,000 defenders led by Valette, now 70 years old. The siege lasted nearly 4 months. Fort St. Elmo, expected to hold days, held over a month, and every defender inside died buying time for the rest of the island. Valette himself stood on the walls under cannon fire, refusing to retreat, as his garrison shrank toward the few hundred men still standing in the final dark hour before a September dawn, the well long since dry, water carried up from the harbor a mouthful at a time. They never had to make that last stand. The exhausted Ottoman force withdrew to its ships. Caretakers of the sick had just become, in the eyes of an entire continent, the shield that stopped an empire. Valette built a new fortress city after the Siege of Valletta, still standing today. The order ruled Malta 2 more centuries, running hospitals again among the finest in Europe, before Napoleon took the island almost without a fight in 1798. The order that refused to die, from Malta to a legacy of mercy. Even then, the order didn't end. It reorganized as a humanitarian and medical order, which it remains today, still wearing the same 8-pointed cross, still devoted to the sick 700 years later. Much of this comes from the order's own archive in Malta, one of the most complete, unbroken administrative records surviving from medieval Europe. For years, historians read it only for dates and property. In the 20th century, scholars began cross-referencing hospital ledgers and personal letters, instead revealing progressive medical practices, and buried in knights' private correspondence, homesickness and doubt the official record had never shown. 2 legacies remain. One is the fortress kingdom itself, proof of how far discipline and stubbornness can carry an institution built from almost nothing. The other is quieter. Every time this order lost everything, it never dissolved. It simply looked for the next place to rebuild, and the next stranger to care for. The identity was never really about the land. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight, from a small hospice in a conquered city to the walls that once stopped an empire. I wish you a calm and peaceful night.